I'd like to take a moment to discuss Miranda rights, specifically when they apply and what the remedies are for any violations. The reason being is that during consultations with my clients, one of the most commonly asked or raised issues is the fact that Miranda rights were not read. Therefore, I'd like to address the two-pronged test that applies in determining when you are required to have your Miranda rights read. The first prong of that test is looking at whether or not you were in police custody at the time the statements were made. Custody is not necessarily defined by an arrest. However, it is a restriction on your freedom to leave. For example, being placed in handcuffs, being placed in the back of a police car, being held at a police station, looking at the number of officers that were surrounding you at the time, and whether or not there were any weapons drawn and being pointed at you at the time of the incident. If the court determines that you were in police custody, the next thing we would need to look at is whether or not there was an interrogation. An interrogation is when the police officer is asking you questions that directly relate to the crime for which you're being held in custody. If the court does find you were in custody and that you were being interrogated at the time you were in custody and you were not read your Miranda rights prior to the interrogation, that would be a violation of your Miranda rights. If the court does determine that there was a violation of your Miranda rights, that would be addressed at a motions hearing. At the motions hearing, this is something that is decided solely by the judge, and the judge would determine whether or not these statements were in fact in violation of your Miranda rights. If the judge determines that you were in police custody prior to the interrogation taking place and that you were not read your Miranda rights as required by law, the proper remedy would be the exclusion of any of the statements that were obtained in violation of the Miranda rule. That's why it's important to hire an aggressive Maryland criminal defense attorney to ensure that if your Miranda rights were violated, you will have all the protections when you go to court to properly suppress those statements.